The French Riviera, July 1976. Imagine the air, thick and sweet, with the smell of salt, jasmine, and expensive perfume. The sun hangs heavy and gold over the promenades and glay and nice, baking the pastel-colored buildings and casting long shadows from the palm trees. Below, on the bright pebble beaches, the beautiful and the damned lay side by side, their bodies slick with sun oil. This is the playground of the global elite, a sun-drenched paradise where old money, new money, and celebrity converge. Ferraris and Rolls-Royces purr along the coastal roads, and in the evenings, casinos glitter, their doors open to sheikhs, movie stars, and industrialists. It's a world built on wealth, on secrets, on things kept under lock and key. And in the heart of this dazzling city, on the bustling avenue Jean M. Dessin, stands the Société Générale Bank. Not a palace, not a monument, but a fortress. A solid, imposing structure of stone and steel, a silent promise of security to its wealthy clientele. Inside its vault, buried deep beneath the city streets, are the jewels, the stock certificates, the gold bars, the stacks of untraceable cash, and the hidden love letters of the Riviera's most powerful people. It is a place considered as impenetrable as Fort Knox. But over one long, sweltering holiday weekend, while the rest of Nice celebrated Bastille Day with fireworks and champagne, this fortress was being violated, silently, methodically, and with a level of audacity that would soon become legend. Monday, July 19th, the holiday weekend is over. The city is shaking off its festive haze and getting back to the business of money. Bank employees at the Société Générale arrive, sipping their morning coffee, chatting about the weekend's festivities. The routine is the same as any other Monday. Lights are switched on, counters are polished, and the day's business is prepared. The bank manager, a man of precision and habit, makes his way down to the lower levels. His destination, the vault. He inserts his key, turns the handle of the massive circular steel door, and it doesn't budge. He tries again. Nothing. A flicker of annoyance, perhaps. Mechanical failures, while rare, do happen. He calls for another senior employee with the second key. Together, they try to unlock the vault. The thick steel door remains stubbornly, unnervingly still. Now, the annoyance is turning to a cold knot of concern in the pit of his stomach. Maintenance is called. They try their tools. They use more force. The door is sealed shut, as if it's become one solid piece of metal with its frame. Panic begins to creep into the edges of the professional calm. There's only one explanation. Someone has sealed the vault door from the inside. Consider the impossibility of that scenario. To weld it from the inside, someone would have to be, well, inside, trapped. A botched robbery, a hostage situation. The police are called, their sirens cutting through the morning traffic on the avenue Jean M. Dessin, a sound that turns heads and draws a curious crowd. The bank is sealed, the street cordoned off. Something is very wrong at the Société Générale. For hours, experts work on the door. Drills whine, hammers clang against steel. Finally, with a groan of tortured metal, they manage to force it open. The first thing that hits them is the smell. Stale air, dust, the metallic scent of acetylene torches, and something else. The lingering aroma of food and wine. The police step inside, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, and they stop, frozen. The scene before them is not one of chaos and destruction. It's one of bizarre, methodical order. The floor is littered with empty wine bottles, dirty plates, and the remains of carefully prepared meals. It looks as if someone had a leisurely picnic, a weekend-long party, right here in the heart of the city's financial sanctum. And then they see the safe deposit boxes, hundreds of them, pried open with crowbars and chisels, their metal doors bent and gaping like empty mouths. Strewn across the floor are the things the thieves deemed unworthy. Velvet boxes that once held priceless necklaces, now empty. Discarded bond certificates, family photo albums, their intimate moments exposed to the harsh glare of the police flashlights. It's a scene of mass violation, a surgical strike that took the heart out of over 400 private worlds. The initial estimates are staggering. Somewhere in the realm of 50 million francs, a sum that, today, would be worth well over 100 million euros. But it's not the scale of the theft that is the most chilling detail. It's what they find on the back wall of the vault, scrawled in confident, almost elegant, chalk letters. A message, a calling card for the ghosts who had spent their weekend here. It reads, sans armes, ni violence, ni haine, without weapons, without violence, without hate. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, in the hills overlooking the city, A man named Albert Spaggiari is probably tending to his chicken farm. To his neighbors, he is a charming eccentric, a professional photographer with a studio in the city, a former paratrooper who fought for France in Indochina, a man quick with a joke and a smile. He is charismatic, handsome, and utterly unremarkable in the grand scheme of things. He is, to all the world, just another face in the sun-drenched crowd of nice. A man nobody would ever suspect of being the architect of the crime of the century. The police, standing in the silent, desecrated vault, are faced with an impossible puzzle. There was no forced entry into the bank itself. The alarm system was never triggered. The thieves had seemingly materialized inside the most secure room in the city, spent an entire weekend emptying it, and then vanished into thin air, leaving behind only empty boxes, a few wine bottles, and a polite, taunting message. They had committed a perfect, bloodless crime. The initial investigation was a frantic search for an entry point. How did they get in? The question hung over the city like the humid summer air. There was only one impossible answer, a theory so outlandish it felt like something from a movie. But as investigators scoured the bank, they finally found it. Tucked away behind a row of cabinets in the back of the vault was a hole. A dark, gaping hole, just large enough for a man to crawl through. It led into the earth, into the darkness beneath the city. The thieves hadn't broken in through the front door. They had come from below. And so the central questions of this audacious crime began to form. Questions that would baffle France and captivate the world. Who possessed the genius, the patience, and the nerve to tunnel their way into the heart of a major bank? Who were these gentlemen thieves who worked without violence and drank wine on the job? And most importantly, as they crawled back into the labyrinth of the city as sewers with a fortune that could last a dozen lifetimes, where in the world did they go? The hunt was on, but the target was a ghost, a phantom who had just pulled off the perfect heist. The investigation began not as a manhunt, but as an archaeological dig. The nice brigade criminelle, the city's elite detectives, were confronted with a crime scene unlike any they had ever encountered. It was clean, too clean. There were no fingerprints, no stray hairs, no dropped tools left behind in haste. The perpetrators had been meticulous, wiping down every surface and taking all their equipment with them. They had treated the vault of the Société Générale not like a target to be smashed, but like a private clubhouse to be tidied up after a weekend gathering. The real focus was the hole in the wall. Detectives, engineers, and sewer workers gathered at its mouth, peering into the pitch-black opening. This was their only way in, the only path to understanding the criminal's journey. The first team to enter had to crawl on their hands and knees. The air was thick with the foul stench of the sewer, a jarring contrast to the cool, filtered air of the bank vault. The tunnel was a masterpiece of illicit engineering. It ran for 25 feet, a straight and narrow path through solid earth and concrete, shored up with wooden braces and wired with its own makeshift lighting system. This wasn't the work of impulsive thugs. It was a construction project, planned with the precision of a military operation. Imagine the lead detective, a seasoned veteran of the force, standing at the tunnel's end where it opened into the vast, echoing more of Nice's main sewer conduit. The trail went instantly cold. The sewer system was an underground maze, a web of tunnels stretching for miles beneath the city streets. The thieves had used the city's own veins to bleed it dry, and once back in the main flow, they could have surfaced from any one of hundreds of manholes, disappearing into the midday crowds without a trace. They had achieved the perfect getaway. Weeks turned into a sweltering, frustrating summer. The case was a media sensation. Dubbed the heist of the century, the police were under a microscope. They chased down every conceivable lead. They interrogated known bank robbers across Europe. They profiled the crime, assuming it was the work of the Corsican or Marseille's mobs, the traditional heavyweights of the French underworld. But the style didn't fit. The message left on the wall, without weapons, without violence, without hate, it was too poetic, too arrogant for a typical syndicate hit. They investigated bank employees, security guards, even the construction workers who had built the bank decades earlier. Every path led to a dead end. The crew that had spent months digging under the city had vanished as completely as the fortune they had stolen. The first crack in the case didn't come from a brilliant piece of detective work or a forensic miracle. It came, as it so often does, from human weakness. A woman scorned, months after the heist, with the investigation stalled and the trail grown ice cold. A former girlfriend of one of the gang members walked into a police station. She had been promised a cut of the profits, a slice of the glamorous new life the money would bring. But she had been cut loose, forgotten. Fueled by anger and a thirst for revenge, she decided to talk. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew a name. One name. A low-level hood who had bragged to her about his involvement in a big job. That was all the police needed. They found the man and brought him in. The pressure they applied was immense. At first, he denied everything. But faced with the woman's testimony and the threat of spending the rest of his life in prison, he broke. Piece by piece, the story spilled out. He spoke of the grueling, claustrophobic work in the tunnel, of digging by candlelight in the filth and the dark, all while the city partied above them. He described the moment they finally broke through into the vault, their air thick with the smell of money and dust. The detectives listened, enthralled. This was the inside story they had been desperate for. But they needed more. They needed the leader, the architect of the whole impossible scheme. And finally, the captured thief gave him up. He told them the man they were looking for was no hardened gangster from the Marseille's waterfront. He was a local, a photographer, a former soldier, a man who planned the entire operation from his home in the hills above Nice. His name was Albert Spaggiari. The detectives in the interrogation room could hardly believe it. They ran the name through their databases. Albert Spaggiari. The record showed a man with a minor history of petty crimes from his youth, but nothing more. He was a registered business owner, a public figure of sorts. A man who mingled with the very people whose valuables he was accused of stealing. The ghost finally had a name. The mastermind wasn't some shadowy international criminal. He was hiding in plain sight, smiling for the cameras. The police had their man. Now, all they had to do was catch him. But they were about to learn that with a man like Albert Spaggiari, catching him was only the beginning of the problem. The arrest of Albert Spaggiari was an anticlimax. Acting on the information from their informant, French authorities learned he was on a photographic assignment in the Far East. They simply waited. When his plane touched down at the Nice Cité d'Azur airport at the end of October 1976, he was met on the tarmac not by a driver, but by a reception committee of plainclothes detectives. Spaggiari, tanned and smiling, showed no surprise. He greeted the officers with a casual charm, almost as if he were expecting them. He denied everything, of course, dismissing the accusation with a wave of his hand and a witty remark. To the police, he seemed more like a movie star inconvenienced by an overzealous fan than a man facing life in prison. In the interrogation rooms, he was impenetrable. He was not your typical criminal, worn down by fear and intimidation. He was intelligent, articulate, and seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the intellectual chess match with the detectives. He treated the whole affair as a grand misunderstanding. Yes, he knew some of the men they mentioned, but only socially. The heist, a brilliant piece of work, he admitted, but it had nothing to do with him. For weeks, the investigation went nowhere. They had him in a cell, but his spirit was free. He spent his days reading poetry and writing in his journal, a man completely at ease. The confession they had from the first accomplice was beginning to look thin. It was one man's word against another's, and Spaggiari was infinitely more credible and charismatic than the low-level gangster who had implicated him. The lead detective decided to change his approach. He recognized that Spaggiari wasn't motivated by money alone. He was driven by something far more powerful, ego. So, instead of trying to break him, the detective decided to build him up. He began to talk about the heist not as a crime, but as an artistic masterpiece. He praised its elegance, its precision, its sheer, breathtaking audacity. He told Spaggiari that whoever had planned it was not a common thief, but a genius, a true artist of crime. Spaggiari, the man who craved recognition more than wealth, finally took the bait. A smile spread across his face. The dam of denial broke, and a flood of boasts and details poured out. He didn't just confess. He reveled in the story. He recounted how he first got the idea from a pulp novel he'd read, how he spent months meticulously planning the route through the sewers, using his knowledge from his paratrooper days to map the city's underbelly. He described how he recruited his team of sewer rats from the Marseille's underworld, chosen not for their muscle, but for their grit and ability to work in the dark, filthy conditions for months on end. He painted a vivid picture of the weekend in the vault, the camaraderie, the fine wine, the thrill of cracking open one box after another. The police had their confession, a detailed, epic narrative straight from the mastermind himself. The case was closed. Or so they thought. The scene shifts to the Palais de Justice in Nice, a grand, imposing building where the wheels of French law turn slowly. March 10, 1977. Spaggiari is in the office of the investigating magistrate, Judge Richard Brazes. It's a PI trial hearing, a formality. The room is stuffy, filled with detectives, lawyers, and clerks. Spaggiari, dressed impeccably, seems relaxed, even helpful. He listens intently as the judge reviews the evidence. Then, he leans forward, and with an air of intellectual curiosity, points to a document on the judge's desk, a coded map of the sewer system the police had found. He claims it's a fiction he created to mislead them and offers to decode it. The judge, the detectives, the lawyers, they all lean in, intrigued. Their attention is focused for just a second on the cryptic paper, and in that second, Spaggiari explodes into motion. It is a single, fluid act of breathtaking athleticism. He vaults onto the judge's wide desk, uses it as a springboard to leap toward the tall office window, throws it open, and dives headfirst into the open air. For a moment, the room is suspended in disbelief. Men shout, chairs scrape across the floor. They rush to the window, their minds unable to process what just happened, expecting to see the shattered body of their prized prisoner on the street 3 stories below. But Albert Spaggiari had planned his exit as meticulously as he had planned his heist. He hadn't jumped to his death. He had landed with a deafening crash on the roof of a parked Renault 6, his fall broken by the crumpling metal. Without missing a beat, he rolled of the car, landed on his feet, and sprinted across the street. There, as if summoned by magic, a motorcycle was waiting, its engine already roaring. Spaggiari swung himself onto the back, and with a scream of tires, the bike shot into the midday traffic, weaving through cars and disappearing in seconds. The police stood at the window, staring down in impotent fury. He was gone. He had confessed. The case was solved. He was in their custody, in the most secure building in the city. And now he was gone. In that one spectacular leap, Albert Spaggiari had ceased to be a criminal. He had become a folk hero, a myth. The manhunt was on again, but this time, they were hunting a legend who had made the entire French justice system his stage, and the whole world his audience. The manhunt for Albert Spaggiari was the biggest in a generation, but it was a hunt for a ghost. He was gone. Interpol alerts were issued. Borders were sealed. His face was on the front page of every newspaper in Europe. But Spaggiari had a head start, and more importantly, he now had a legend. In the CAFs and bars of France, people spoke of his leap from the judge's window with a kind of hushed admiration. He wasn't just a thief anymore. He was an icon, a trickster who had made a fool of the entire establishment. He was a symbol of defiance, the dashing gentleman rogue who played the game by his own rules and won. While the police chased shadows, Spaggiari was living a life torn from the pages of a spy novel. He settled in South America, supposedly in Argentina, where he lived under a new identity, protected by a network of sympathizers and the fortune he had smuggled out of France. But he could never truly disappear. His ego was too immense to allow it. He began to taunt his pursuers from afar. He granted secret interviews to trusted journalists, posing for photographs in clever disguises, always with a smirk playing on his lips. He even wrote his memoirs, brazenly titling them Les Gouts du Paradis, the Sewers of Paradise, detailing the heist in his own romantic, self-aggrandizing prose. He was a fugitive, but he was also a media star, directing his own myth from the shadows. Back in France, the justice system, though humiliated, continued its work. Using the detailed confessions Spaggiari had so foolishly provided before his escape, authorities were able to identify and round up most of his accomplices. They were the grunts, the sewer rats who had done the digging. In court, they were sentenced to years in prison, but their convictions felt hollow. The foot soldiers were jailed, but the general was free, living a life of luxury on the proceeds of their shared crime. And the money, it was gone, vanished. A few bundles of cash were recovered from the arrested gang members, but it was a pittance, a microscopic fraction of the total haul. The gold bars, the priceless jewels, the stacks of foreign currency, the bearer upon the vast majority of the treasure, estimated to be worth over 100 million euros in today's money, was never seen again. It became a legend in itself, a lost treasure that, to this day, is rumored to be hidden away in bank vaults and secret stashes across the globe. For the victims, there was no recovery. Their stolen memories, their family heirlooms, their life savings, all were sacrificed at the altar of Spaggiari's grand adventure. There would be no final, dramatic confrontation, no climactic courtroom showdown. Albert Spaggiari was convicted in absentia by the French courts and sentenced to life in prison. But the sentence was meaningless, an empty gesture against a man living a life of sun-drenched freedom thousands of miles away. He had won. He had conceived a perfect crime, executed it flawlessly, and engineered an escape that was even more brilliant. He had beaten them at every turn. The end for Albert Spaggiari came not with a police raid, but with a doctor's diagnosis. In the late 1980s, the years of hard living caught up with him, and he was diagnosed with terminal throat cancer. The invincible folk hero was, after all, a mortal man. In 1989, under a false name and with a changed appearance from rumored plastic surgery, he secretly made his way back to Europe, wanting to die on his home continent. He passed away quietly in a house in Italy. But even in death, he orchestrated one final bizarre act. Days later, his friends fulfilled his last wish. Under the cover of darkness, they drove his body across the border into France and left it on the doorstep of his elderly mother's home. It was his last return, his final silent taunt. In the end, what is the legacy of the heist of the century? Justice was only partially served. A few men went to prison, but the mastermind lived and died a free man. The victims were never made whole. The law was broken on a monumental scale, and the man responsible became a celebrated figure. Albert Spaggiari's story forces us to question the nature of justice itself. He was a thief, but his audacity captured the world's imagination, turning a criminal into a legend. He left behind a legacy of empty vaults, frustrated detectives, and one lingering, tantalizing question that ensures his myth will live on forever. Where is the treasure from the sewers of paradise?